Welcome to Generous Theology, with Chuck and Brock. The fellows are talking today from chapter 19, by Professor Cecilia Trey-Fogli, from the book, The Cambridge History of Medieval Philosophy.
It's interesting. Now, I didn't know a lot about interesting sort of his commentary on all of that. I also, as I was listening to your comments and I was thinking about, there does seem perhaps to be about the out of many one, and how there often seem to be opposite concepts that sort of come together. And I think there's a sense in which you see that a little bit as well in dialectic argument as well. That there is a sense in which I think, and I know John Frame has talked about this a little bit. It is really interesting to me, his thoughts on our inability to come down to a grand unified scheme of things as humans. Also the sense in which it is also not the opposite. It's also not, we live in a world of utter and complete randomness where every possibility of everything exists. And there's a sense in which there still is a grand unity that holds together in God, but there's also a sense in which even that grand unity shows a level of diversity. Frame used the concept of Trinity to talk about that. As you were working through, that's what was going through my mind as I'm just thinking about that idea of whether it is possible to have a grand unified theory. Is there a sense in which without a God would we be in the opposite situation, and the whole idea of entropy just taking over? So I don't know that I've added answers, but the framework through which I was thinking as you were giving that interesting introduction into some of the thinking and how it applies to what we've been talking about with regard to change.
Thank you. Should I try to go through the other points from Gadamer here?
Sure, let's do that. Let's go a few more minutes and do that.
Okay. And I'll try to be brief. These are some of the most interesting dimensions, and I'm going to try to be brief even with what in some sense are the most subtle and nuanced points. God help me. But one of the things that Gadamer talks about, reflecting on Heraclitus, is this idea that, now, this is a poem from Plato citing Heraclitus that makes a really interesting point about change in the context of the human condition. Now, the fragments are short and cryptic. That's very typical for Heraclitus. And here's the particular fragment. It says, "When living, one touches on death in sleep, and when awake, we touch on sleep." And so you just mentioned Trinity, and I want you to think about these three states of human being: the state of awakeness, the state of when we are asleep, and then the state of death. Now we've transitioned into the change in the life cycle of a living being. And Gadamer thought that Heraclitus was talking about the parallels that existed between being awake and sleeping, and being alive and being dead. So in some sense, he thought there's an analogy here. He sees Heraclitus as thinking about death as an eternal sleep in this final cessation of life. And then Gadamer reflects. Remember, he's got this idea of a unity of opposites. So thinking about Heraclitus, Gadamer asks the question, do the living and the dead perhaps possess an inseparable unity? Do the living and the dead perhaps possess an inseparable unity? So here he's even talking about the change between being and non-being. And not just that, because of course we have something in the middle, this state of being asleep, which is not the same exactly as being alive and awake, and yet it's not the same exactly as being dead. Now there's one final dimension, and I promise I'll do my best to make this quick, that's related to change in the human subject, and that's the problem of knowledge. And so you have this change in human state, and if we think about it biblically, the Bible gives us a picture. A change from innocence, from a change to sin in the story, the original sin that Adam and Eve fell into when they sinned in the Garden of Eden. And they underwent a change in status. They went from not knowing A to knowing A. Now, what is A? Well, that's complicated. But something happened when they ate that fruit. Something relational happened. Also, something judicial happened. Their judicial state changed. They became cosmic traitors, cosmic criminals against God. And so you can think about knowledge in some sense in its relationship between what Gadamir's talking about earlier, death, sleep, and being awake, you can think about it in this context here. In some sense, is it fair to say that humankind was awake or sleeping with respect to their innocence regarding their original sin? So before eating the forbidden fruit, we're clearly not in the same ontological state of being that they were when they became awakened to their sinfulness after eating the fruit. And again, I'm just going to close with a fragment from Heraclitus. Not knowing something is like being asleep, and then knowing that thing is like being awakened. Okay, that was the deep end of the pool, Chuck, and I think there's more there, but for the sake of time, we'll hold off for now. With all of these different categories, I think our periodic table has the capacity to grow quite large.
Absolutely. No, that was maybe the deep end of the pool, but it's fun to splash around in it and dive around in it. Yeah, a lot to chew on there, but very interesting. I'm glad that you brought in Gadamer. As you walked through that and change, life and death, and all these issues that he was dealing with, and as you point out, he's dealing with them from very much a secular perspective, on Christian perspective, but that there's such issues that we deal with as Christians. I hope you don't mind if I end things this way, but it reminded me of a hymn that we used to sing a lot when I was a kid in church. We don't sing it as often anymore. I miss it. But it's the hymn, "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home." And I was thinking, especially, there are a couple of verses. It stood, or earth received her frame. From everlasting thou art God, to end years the same. 1,000 ages in thy sight are like an evening on, short as the watch that ends night before the rising. Time, like an ever-rolling stream, bears all its sons away. They fly forgotten as a dream dies at the opening day. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be thou our guard while life shall last, and our home. And in the end, as we dive around in this deep end of the pool, it's fun to do that. I love doing it. I'm glad that we get to jump around in this pool together, Brock. But there is also a sense in which I'm also glad at the edge of the pool, or maybe it's whether it's the edge of the pool or whether it's a life preserver that's part of the pool, that we've got that God who's our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be our guard while life shall last, and our eternal. So yeah, that's something to really perform.
Thank you, my friend. I thought that was a great hymn. Those are beautiful words, and I'm so grateful for this chapter. I'm thankful to the author for really great content.